The Traveler, a Choice Seeker Story. Episode 1, The Last Echo of Vanadim. This story is an adaptation of the podcast series titled Seeker's Choice. The first episode of the story reiterates to listeners and reader alike the existence of other planets with various life forms and ultimately introduces the Traveler series. In this series, we will explore new dimensions, galaxies, worlds, and the entire cosmos as taught in the Seeker's Choice podcast. The audio story, subsequent video, and documentary series is intended to give our audience a visual and innate understanding of the message of Choice Seeker. Remember, every seeker has a choice, and the choice of the seeker determines their destiny.
The Last Echo of Vanadim. Prologue. The Rise of Lord Yandom. On the vastly populated and ancient planet of Vanadim, nestled in the distant reaches of the Pegasus Galaxy, the winds of change had begun to blow. This world, once home to a tapestry of tribes and diverse human-like life forms, was being torn apart by the ambitions of a single man, Lord Yandom. Vanadim was a world of contrasts, with crimson deserts stretching for miles, broken only by jagged mountains that pierced the dusty skies. The planet's inhabitants of various human-like species, known as forms, had evolved into distinct tribes, each with unique characteristics and cultures. Some were humanoid, resembling the ancient humans of Earth, while others bore more alien features, elongated limbs, bioluminescent skin, and intricate patterned markings. Among these tribes, the Vantuleins, who appeared nearly identical to humans, considered themselves the highest form. They claimed that their resemblance to the ancient humans was a sign of purity, of a divine heritage that set them apart from the other, lesser forms. The Vantuleins had long been the most powerful tribe on Vanadim, but under the rule of Lord Yus, their dominance had been tempered by a sense of responsibility. Lord Yus was a wise and benevolent leader, one who believed that the strength of the Vantuleins should be used to maintain peace and harmony across Vanadim. However, the peace Lord Yus had cultivated was fragile, for it was based on a delicate balance of power among the tribes, one that was shattered the moment Lord Yandom took control after the ill-fated death of Lord Yus in a chemical fire. Lord Yandom was nothing like his predecessor. Where Lord Yus had seen the diversity of Vanadim as something to be tolerated, Yandom saw it as a menace that needed to be purged. He believed in the absolute superiority of the Vantuleins and sought to cleanse Vanadim of all other forms. In his eyes, the lesser tribes were impurities, blights upon the world that needed to be eradicated to create a utopia of pure human, like Vantulein blood. His swift and ruthless rise to power upon Lord Yus's mysterious death was not without controversy. Many suspected the peaceful Lord's death was no accident, but no one dared speak of what lurked in the dark corners of their minds. Yandom seized control of the Vantulein coalition with promises of glory, wealth, and dominance. The more moderate voices within the coalition were quickly silenced, some through intimidation, others through more permanent means. With his grip on power secured, Yandom wasted no time in executing his vision of a pure Vanadim ruled and entirely dominated by Vantuleins. The first steps were subtle, restricting the trade and movement of the other tribes, sowing seeds of distrust and conflict among them. But as the years passed, his methods became increasingly brutal. What began as political maneuvering soon escalated into full-scale genocide. Chapter 101. The Campaign of Extinction. The campaign began with the weaker tribes, those who lacked the numbers or the resources to defend themselves. Yandom's strategy was as cunning as it was merciless. This was because he believed deep within him that the other forms were an aberration, and he had the divine mandate to correct it. Yandom dispatched Vantulein forces to the borders of these tribes under the guise of offering protection from supposed threats. Threats that had been manufactured by Yandom himself. Once the tribes were isolated and cut off from their allies, the true nature of Yandom's intentions was revealed. The first to fall were the Agronians, a peaceful tribe known for their intricate wood carvings and their deep connection to the forests of Vanadim. The Agronians had always been small in number, and their pacifist ways made them easy prey. The Vantuleins descended upon their villages like a storm. The Agronians, with their simple tools and non-violent ethos, were no match for the advanced weaponry of the Vantuleins. Their villages were burned to the ground, their people slaughtered without mercy. The few who survived the initial onslaught were herded into the weapons factory of the Vantuleins, where they were worked to death under the harshest conditions imaginable. What struck out about the carnage of Yandom's campaign was that he liked to give speeches as he systematically wiped out each form. In the midst of the battle, the Vantulein looter jam, a huge automobile that transmitted audio messages, was set in the middle of any town or city. As the massacre continued, you could hear Yandom in the background saying, "The purge of the lesser forms is a necessary evil. Any lesser form can choose voluntary death or die at the hands of Vantulein might. To be a lesser form is a disease that must be purged out of Vanadim. All lesser forms must accept death as a needed purge to cleanse the land." So his voice would echo as blood spilled. The village of Bostras, the largest of the Agronian settlements, burned under the pale light of Vanadim's twin moons. Yandom stood on a nearby hill speaking and watching the flames rise into the sky. Beside him, his chief advisor, Pasiphae, a man known for his cold pragmatism, surveyed the scene with a detached expression. "The Agronians were no match for our forces, my lord," Pasiphae said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Their foolishness was their undoing. They never even tried to resist." Yandom nodded, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "The Agronians were weak, Pasiphae. They were a blight upon this world. Their existence was an insult to the purity of the Vantulein race." Pasiphae turned to face his lord, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And what of the Kael'vara, my lord? They are not like the Agronians. They are warriors, strong and proud. They will not fall so easily." Yandom's smile widened. "The Kael'vara are indeed strong, but strength can be turned against itself. We will cut off their supplies, starve them out. When they are weak and desperate, they will fall like all the others." Next were the Kael'vara, a tribe of fierce warriors who lived in the high mountains. The Kael'vara had long been respected for their strength and military prowess, and they prided themselves on their independence. But even they could not withstand the full might of the Vantulein war machine. Yandom knew that a direct assault would be costly, so he employed a different tactic: starvation. Vantulein forces cut off all supply routes to the Kael'vara's mountain strongholds, blocking their access to food and water. As the months dragged on, the once proud Kael'vara warriors grew weak and desperate. When Yandom's forces finally attacked, the Kael'vara were too weak to put up a good fight. Their warriors were cut down in their homes, and their leaders were publicly executed as a warning to any who might resist the Vantulein advance. As Lord Yandom and Pasiphae stood before the bound and beaten Kael'vara leader, General Trayvon, Yandom's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "You see, General," Yandom said, his voice dripping with contempt, "your strength meant nothing in the end. You were always going to fall." Trayvon, his face gaunt from starvation, glared up at Yandom with a mixture of hatred and defiance. "You think you have won? No. No, your destruction has only begun. Today it's Kael'vara, tomorrow your greed and ambition will tear down Vantulein itself." He smirked without any ounce of fear. Yandom's smile faded replaced by a cold look of fear and uncertainty. No, Trayvon. You are just a desperate old man who is too afraid to die. I assure you, your death will mark the end of your people and the glory of the Vantulein race. With a swift motion, Yandom drew his blade and plunged it into Trayvon's heart, ending the general's life in an instant. As Trayvon's body slumped to the ground, Yandom wiped the blood from his blade and turned to Pasiphae. "Prepare the soldiers," Yandom ordered, his voice calm and measured. "We move on to the next tribe." The Vantuleins moved from one tribe to the next with terrifying efficiency. Each new conquest was more brutal than the last, as Yandom sought to make an example of those who dared to defy him. The lands of the conquered tribes were salted and left barren, their cultures erased from the face of Vanadim as if they had never existed. Yandom's cruelty knew no bounds. He did not merely seek to kill his enemies, he sought to erase them from history. Ancient temples and cultural artifacts were destroyed, languages were forbidden, and any trace of the conquered tribes was obliterated. The survivors were often rounded up and subjected to horrifying experiments, as Yandom's scientists sought to understand what made the Vantuleins superior, or so they claimed. In truth, these experiments were little more than sadistic torture, a final act of cruelty inflicted upon those who had already lost everything. But Yandom was not satisfied with mere physical destruction. He understood that to truly wipe out a people, he had to destroy their spirit as well. To this end, he spread fear and mistrust among the remaining tribes, using propaganda and psychological warfare to turn them against each other. Spies and agents provocateurs were planted within the ranks of the other tribes, spreading rumors and sowing discord. Old alliances crumbled, and once united tribes turned on each other in desperate attempts to survive. The Vantuleins exploited this chaos to their advantage, picking off the weakened tribes one by one. As news spread from Tirbe to tribe of the terror of the Vantuleins, panic, fear, and a feeling of hopelessness gripped all the other forms. Many complied with Yandom's message and took their own lives. Others, in an attempt to escape, were chopped down by Vantulein drones called Eyes in the Sky. The Vantuleins also unleashed biological weapons upon those who resisted, engineered diseases that decimated populations in a matter of weeks. Entire cities were turned into charnel houses as the sick and dying filled the streets. The survivors, too weak to resist, were rounded up and executed. Yandom's forces would then move on, leaving only silence and death in their wake. By the time Yandom's campaign was over, the world of Vanadim had been transformed into a graveyard. The diverse cultures that had once flourished on its surface were reduced to ash and memory. The once beautiful landscapes of the planet were now scorched and barren, devoid of life. And yet, despite all his efforts, one tribe remained, an isolated enclave that had so far escaped the Vantuleins' wrath. Chapter 2. The Last Tribe. At the farthest fringes of Vanadim lay the city of Karvon. Unlike the other tribes, the Karvonites had managed to avoid the devastation wrought by Lord Yandom's campaign. They were a small, insular people, known for their elven-like features, tall, slender frames, pointed ears, and eyes that shimmered with an ethereal light. But it was not their appearance that set them apart. It was their technological prowess. While the other tribes of Vanadim had developed in relative isolation, the Karvonites had long been at the forefront of technological innovation. They had built their city beneath a massive, shimmering dome, an impenetrable barrier that protected them from the harsh elements that laid in the location of the city, and, as it turned out, from the horrors of war. The dome, a marvel of engineering, was powered by a mysterious energy source known only to the Karvonites. It could withstand any assault, absorb energy blasts, and even deflect physical attacks. For years, it had kept the Karvonites safe, and they had little interest in the affairs of the other tribes. Inside the dome, Karvon was a place of peace and serenity. The streets were lined with elegant buildings made of gleaming metal and crystal, and the air was filled with the soft hum of advanced machinery. The Karvonites lived in harmony with their technology, using it to enhance their lives without sacrificing their connection to nature. Gardens and parks were interwoven with the city's infrastructure, and water flowed freely through canals that glistened in the artificial sunlight. It was a utopia, untouched by the darkness that had consumed the rest of Vanadim. Elder Klux, the leader of the Karvonites, stood at the center of the city's Grand Council chamber. The chamber was a vast, circular room with high ceilings and walls adorned with intricate carvings that depicted the history of the Karvonite people. A soft, bluish light emanated from the floor, casting a serene glow over the assembled council members. Klux was a wise and ancient figure, his long silver hair flowing over his shoulders, and his deep blue eyes filled with the wisdom of centuries. "We have watched the world beyond our dome tear itself apart," Klux said, his voice calm but tinged with sorrow. "The Vantuleins, under Yandom's rule, have brought ruin to Vanadim. They have destroyed entire tribes, wiped out cultures that have existed for millennia, and now they are at our doorstep." The council members murmured in agreement. They had all seen the reports. Drones and scouts had captured footage of the devastation beyond the dome. The Karvonites had remained isolated for so long, but they could no longer ignore the reality that was closing in on them. "Lord Yandom's forces have tried to breach our dome," Klux continued, "but they have failed. Our technology has kept us safe, as it always has. But I fear that Yandom will not rest until he has destroyed us, as he has destroyed all the others." "What can we do?" asked Aiden, a younger council member with sharp features and a determined expression. "We have the technology to defend ourselves, but we cannot stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, Yandom will find a way to break through." Klux nodded gravely. "You are right, Adin. We cannot remain isolated any longer. We must find a way to end this war, not just for ourselves, but for the memory of those who have fallen." The council fell silent, each member deep in thought. The Karvonites had always preferred peace over conflict, using their technological advancements to improve their lives rather than wage war. But now it seemed that war was coming to them, whether they wished it or not. "We could try to negotiate with Yandom," suggested Liara, a tall woman with piercing green eyes. "Perhaps we could offer him something in exchange for peace." Klux shook his head slowly. "Yandom is not a man who can be reasoned with. He is consumed by his vision of a pure Vanadim. He will not stop until he has eradicated every other form from this world." "Then what do we do?" Aden pressed. "We cannot fight him on his terms. We do not have the numbers or the desire for war." Klux looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each council member in turn. "There may be another way," he said slowly, "but it is risky. We have been developing a weapon, a last resort, should the dome fail. It is a device that could destroy Yandom's forces, but it would also cause great destruction. It is not a decision to be made lightly." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. The Karvonites were not a warlike people, and the idea of using such a weapon went against everything they stood for. But as they looked at the images of the devastation beyond their dome, they knew they were running out of options. "We must consider all possibilities," Klux continued. "Yandom will not stop until he has destroyed us. If we are to survive, we must be prepared to do whatever is necessary. The council was silent for a long time, each member grappling with the weight of the decision before them. Finally, it was Adin who spoke. "If it comes to it, we will use the weapon," he said firmly. "But only as a last resort. Let us continue to strengthen our defenses and explore other options. Perhaps there is still a way to end this without resorting to destruction." Klux nodded, his expression heavy with the burden of leadership. "Very well. We will prepare, but we will not lose hope. The Karvonites have survived for centuries by staying true to our values. We will not abandon them now." Chapter 3. The Siege of Karvon. Lord Yandom was furious. Despite his best efforts, the city of Karvon remained untouched, its shimmering dome a constant reminder of his failure. His forces had thrown everything they had at the barrier. Energy cannons, seismic disruptors, even biological attacks. But nothing had worked. The dome absorbed and deflected every assault, leaving the Karvonites safe within their city. Yandom paced back and forth in his war room, his anger simmering just below the surface. Maps and tactical plans covered the walls, and a large holographic display in the center of the room showed a 3D model of Karvon and its surrounding terrain. His advisors stood at attention, watching their lord with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "How is it possible," Yandom growled, "that a single city can defy the entire might of the Vantulein coalition? We have destroyed every other tribe on this planet. And yet, the Karvonites remain unscathed." Yandom was almost going mad. He had always thought he was unstoppable, and the smooth progress of his battles was a clear sign that he was acting in order. However, the blockade began to cast fear and aspersion upon the ever-confident and brutal leader. "My lord," said Pasiphae, his chief advisor, stepping forward cautiously, "the Karvonites possess technology far beyond our own. Their dome is unlike anything we've encountered before. It is possible that—" "I don't want excuses, Pasiphae," Yandom snapped, cutting him off. "I want results. I want that dome brought down, and I want the Karvonites wiped from the face of Vanadim." Pasiphae bowed his head, wisely choosing not to argue further. Yandom was a man driven by a singular vision, and anyone who stood in his way, friend or foe, would pay the price. "Perhaps," Pasiphae ventured, "there is another way. If we cannot break the dome from the outside, we could try to get the Karvonites to lower it themselves." Yandom stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing as he considered the idea. "Go on," he said, his tone less harsh. "We could offer them a peace negotiation," Pasiphae suggested. "Invite their leaders to a meeting under the pretense of ending the conflict. If they believe we are sincere, they may lower the dome to allow our delegation inside. Once the dome is down, we can strike." Yandom's lips curled into a smile, the first hint of satisfaction he had shown in days. "Yes," he said slowly. "Yes, that could work. The Karvonites are naive, too trusting for their own good. They may actually believe that we seek peace." Pasiphae nodded, encouraged by Yandom's approval. "If we prepare a small, discreet strike force, they could infiltrate the city as soon as the dome is lowered. We could plant a device, a bomb, perhaps, that would destroy the city from within." Yandom's eyes gleamed with malevolent glee. "A tectonic bomb," he said, the idea forming in his mind. "It would cause the ground beneath Karvon to collapse, taking the entire city with it. The Karvonites would be buried alive." "My lord," Pasiphae said, "there is one other thing to consider. The Silhouettes, the spiritual faction of our coalition. They may oppose this plan. They have always warned against deceit and treachery. They may see this as a path to ruin. Yandom sneered, dismissing the concern with a wave of his hand. The silhouettes are superstitious fools who have long lost their way. They cling to ancient prophecies and fears that have no place in our world. They don't even know what the divine wants again. I am not interested in their warnings. The only thing that matters is that the Karvonites are destroyed. Chapter 4. The Silhouette's Warning. In the dimly lit chamber of the silhouettes, the air was thick with incense and the soft glow of candles. The silhouettes were the spiritual leaders of the Vantulein coalition, a secretive order that held great influence over the people. They were revered for their wisdom and their ability to commune with the spirits of Vanadim, and their prophecies had guided the Vantuleins for generations. But now, they were deeply troubled. The head of their order, a tall, slender figure known as the Orify, stood at the center of the chamber, his expression grave. The other silhouettes sat in a circle around him, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods. "Lord Yandom's plan will bring about the end of all things," the Orify said, his voice echoing softly through the chamber. "He intends to deceive the Karvonites, to lure them into a trap and destroy their city. But the consequences of such an act will be dire." One of the silhouettes, an older woman with a voice like rustling leaves, spoke up. "The Karvonites are not like the other tribes. They have knowledge and power beyond our understanding. If we betray them, it could unleash forces that even Yandom cannot control." The Orify nodded. "The spirits have warned us of this. The Karvonites have the ability to destroy not just themselves, but all of Vanadim. If Yandom follows through with his plan, he will doom us all." "But he will not listen to us," another silhouette said, his voice tinged with fear. "Yandom is too consumed by his hatred, too blinded by his vision of a pure Vanadim. He will not heed our warnings." The Orify sighed deeply. "Then we must take matters into our own hands. We cannot stop Yandom, but we can protect the future. We must anoint his children with the ancient rite of connection, so that they may survive what is to come." The silhouettes murmured in agreement, and the Orify raised his hands, calling for silence. "We will perform the ritual tonight. The children of Yandom must be protected, for they are the last hope for our world." Chapter 5. The Peace Meeting. The next day, Lord Yandom's emissaries sent a message to the Karvonites, requesting a peace meeting to discuss an end to the conflict. Elder Klux and the Karvonite Council were wary, but they knew they could not remain isolated forever. After much debate, they agreed to the meeting, hoping that perhaps, by some miracle, Yandom had seen the futility of his war. The day of the meeting arrived, and the Vantulein delegation approached the dome. From within the city, the Karvonites watched as the small craft hovered just outside the barrier. Inside the craft, hidden from view, was the tectonic bomb, a device of unimaginable destructive power. Elder Klux stood at the controls, his hand hovering over the mechanism that controlled the dome. "Are we sure about this?" he asked, looking to the council for reassurance. "We must try," Aaron said, though his voice was tinged with doubt. "If there is a chance for peace, we cannot let it slip away." Klux nodded, though his heart was heavy with unease. With a deep breath, he activated the mechanism, and the dome began to retract, slowly revealing the city to the outside world. As the Vantulein craft entered the city, Klux and the council stood at the ready, prepared to meet the delegation. But as the craft hovered over the city center, something felt wrong. There was no communication from the Vantuleins, no sign of the promised negotiation. And then, the bomb activated. The ground beneath Karvon began to tremble as the tectonic bomb unleashed its devastating power. Buildings cracked and crumbled, the elegant streets buckled, and the once serene city was thrown into chaos. The Karvonites, unprepared for such a sudden attack, could do nothing as their world began to collapse around them. But in their final moments, the Karvonites enacted their own last resort. A black hole bomb, a device they had developed in secret, meant to be used only if their city was ever breached. As the tectonic bomb tore Karvon apart, the black hole bomb activated, creating a singularity at the heart of the city. The singularity rapidly expanded, consuming everything in its path. The Vantulein craft was torn apart in an instant, and the gravitational pull of the black hole began to draw in the entire city, and then the surrounding landscape. The destruction was absolute, as Vanadim itself began to be consumed by the black hole. Epilogue: The Emergence of Echo. As the black hole expanded, the entire solar system was drawn into its inescapable pull. Stars, planets, and moons, all were consumed by the singularity, reduced to nothingness in the blink of an eye. In the midst of this cosmic destruction, the 5 children of Lord Yandom, Echo, Abraham, Ezradon, Philahan, and Dresden, were torn apart by the immense gravitational forces. But the anointing ritual performed by the silhouettes had bound them to the cosmos in a way that transcended physical form. As their bodies were shredded and scattered into the event horizon, their essence remained intact, transformed into dark matter that lingered at the edge of the singularity. Echo was the first to emerge from the black hole, his consciousness slowly awakening to the vast emptiness of space. He no longer had a physical body, but his awareness persisted, a being of pure dark matter, connected to the fabric of the universe itself. He drifted through the void, the last remnant of a world lost to its own darkness. The memory of Vanadim, of his father's madness, and of the destruction that had consumed everything, was etched into his very being. He was alone, but not entirely. He could still sense the presence of his siblings, their essence scattered across the cosmos, waiting to be reunited. However, deep in him, he prayed his siblings remained there and never emerged. Echo had plans of his own. Now that father is no more, I must rise out of the ashes and build a new world of my own. He thought as images of planet Earth flashed through his mind.